Welcome to episode 248 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking with Sally Berquist about how to uncover the hidden clutter in your curriculum in order to simplify lesson design. Visit truthforteachers.com to get an easy-to-read, easy-to-share version of this podcast episode. Competing priorities can make it difficult to find time for SEL. Word Workouts, available at wordworkouts.org, is a free pre-K-12 lesson library that helps students reflect on the most common emotions they feel every day. Each lesson combines a physical movement video, like a neck stretch, with a set of reflection prompts that are all related to a single emotion and can be done in as little as 10 minutes. Elementary teachers use word workouts for their brain breaks, and secondary teachers use them often during advisory periods to help students reflect and build respect and empathy. To start using this 100% free resource with your students, visit wordworkouts.org. That's wordworkouts.org. This podcast is also sponsored by BetterHelp. If you need someone in your life who is a thoughtful listener and can provide helpful insight as to how you can push through challenging situations, BetterHelp can assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. BetterHelp is professional therapy done securely online, available for folks worldwide, with weekly video or phone sessions, and timely and thoughtful text-based check-ins and responses from your therapist all throughout the week, if that's something you'd like to have. BetterHelp is more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is available. Go to betterhelp.com/truthforteachers to sign up or check out all of the testimonials there. That's betterhelp.com/truthforteachers. You'll get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp with our promo code truthforteachers. So one quick announcement here before I introduce my guest, and that is the new publication schedule for Truth for Teachers that we're trying. It's going to be slightly different for season 15. We are trying out a 4 weeks on, 1 week off format during the season. So this allows our team to sort of catch a breath in between cranking out weekly episodes, and also allows you as a listener to have a catch-up week if there are any episodes that you were too busy to listen to. So we will skip the February 20th episode next Sunday and be back with you again on February 27th. If you still want something from me every Sunday and you want to have something new, go to truthforteachers.com and sign up for my weekly Sunday night email. It's just a short message designed to keep you informed and inspired for the week ahead. And it's something independent of the podcast. I don't publish the content of those emails anywhere else. It's just like a message from me to you. You can sign up right in the header at truthforteachers.com. So we'll be off next week and back the following. My guest today is Sally Berqist. Sally helps teachers in grades K-2 close the achievement gap in writing skills, and she's a strong advocate for writing instruction in the early grades. Over the last 20 years, she's put in over 10,000 hours and worked with over 500 students to create a program that meets the needs of all K-2 students of every ability level. So it's safe to say that Sally has poured through many, many different curriculums and spent time in a lot of different classrooms where she's been able to observe just how much teachers are expected to pack into a school day. There is just way too much in there in most cases, and it can be tricky to sift through everything and figure out what's most important. Sally's going to share some strategies today to help you identify clutter in your curriculum and simplify your lesson design to account for realistic cognitive load and time management. So we are talking about uncovering hidden clutter in your curriculum. And I'm really excited about this because I know many teachers are using a curriculum that was prescribed by their school or their district. They didn't have a choice in it. And personally, that was my teaching experience too. I was always using these gigantic teaching manuals created by Pearson or McGraw-Hill or various other publishers. And I was always struck by just how bloated the curriculum was. It was like they just threw everything in there at teachers. And I realized they're trying to give choice between activities and approaches, but there were 3 times as many things in those teachers' manuals as we would actually have time to do in class. So I don't think I'm alone in feeling that way. And that's part of what creates so much overwhelm in lesson planning because you're just sifting through so much in the curriculum and you're trying to supplement with better activities than what the teacher's guide suggests. It's just a lot and very time consuming. So I'm wondering, that's sort of my experience and observation. Is that what you've noticed in your work examining curriculum?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And with technology, the bloat has gotten even more because now there's
Mm,
just not more papers. There's more, things you can get online and have kids do. Um, and bloat, I've heard that word recently in regards to curriculum. Um, it's such, how do we feel when we're bloated? We
mm,
feel good. It's too much
mhm.
to digest, literally.
Exactly. And that's why I love what you've done in this article because you started off by providing some specific examples of clutter in the curriculum and then what to do if you notice it. So let's start with that because I think sometimes it can be really hard to tell what is actually important and what is essential, especially when you're a new teacher or when you're new to the curriculum or to the grade level or subject. So let's start with your first example of clutter in the curriculum, which is fast pacing.
Yes, there is definitely a disconnect between people who make curriculum and teachers.
Mm,
And the people who make the curriculum are supposed to be the experts, and the teachers, carry it out. And but the problem is that the people who are making it are not in the classroom every day. A lot of them maybe have never taught, or they've, taught for a couple of years and then they went into writing curriculum.
right.
And I can't help but wonder sometimes when I've taught a lesson, did this ever get tried out
Mm,
on real kids in a real classroom? And if so, what was the feedback? And was there a loop? Was there a connection between just writing it and then did it actually work? And how did it look? So
mhm.
that's a concern of mine.
So just seeing that there's just too much in there, the pacing is much faster than what works in the curriculum. Another bit of clutter that you have noticed can look like a lack of clear and specific learning objectives. And I'm a little surprised at this one. This is one I feel like I've noticed less because so many teachers have it sort of hammered in them that they have to display learning objectives for kids. Kids have to be able to articulate those objectives back. And that's really been a big trend over the last couple of years. What problems do you notice in this area of learning objectives and cluttered curriculum?
Yes, I was totally been there. The principal walks in. Do you have your objectives on the wall? And the problem with that is that those are often very general objectives, like what we're learning in science. And I know for me, they were often up for a while
Right.
because you don't have time to change that every single
Exactly.
day. This lesson is about this. Quick, run, put it on the wall.
Right. You pick the most generic thing, so you have to change it, as infrequently as possible. Yes, I have been there.
Exactly. Yeah, just to show that you're thinking about it. In actuality, every lesson should have a good objective.
Hmm.
And it's not really about whether the kids can parrot that back to you. It's how well you know what the lesson is about. And I think if you know that, and especially if it's a series of lessons and you know where it's going and the kids know where it's going, it's you don't have to have them parrot back every time, this is what we're doing. They just know. They know we
Hmm.
did that yesterday and today it led to this and we're working on this. And, you know, um, I don't know where that came from about the whole thing about posting. It's just one of those educational, like, like hula hoops or something, like, this is cool. Let's do this.
Yeah, it's sort of backing into the problem. I mean, the problem is, as you're saying, it's a lack of clear and specific objectives, and so we can appear to have clear objectives, but are we actually? Is that practice of just posting them and having the kids parrot them back? Is it actually doing anything? And a lot of times, it's not. So that's a
Yes.
really good thing to be thinking about as we look at our hidden clutter. Let's let's go into another example that you identified, which is too much cognitive overload. And that's a big one where we're trying to do just way too many things at once. And it's neither developmentally appropriate nor aligned with neuroscience and how the brain learns. Can you say more about the cognitive overload piece?
Yes, absolutely. Well, we all know about working memory and
Right.
how much we can retain at how much new information we can actually work with at any given time. And then we add it to our schema, which is our little library in our head of what we already know and how much is on the shelf. And if you already know a lot, the new information might be easy to add. But if you don't know that much, you're struggling to find out, where does that go? What shelf does that go on? How do I fit that in? Um, so it's really important. Well, for one thing, when you're in that situation, you don't feel very good about yourself. I know when I've gone to a training, and especially if it's having to do with technology, and they start getting ahead of me, and immediately I'm like, oh, I'm really stupid. I
Mm-hmm.
don't get this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's not just the problem of overloading; it's how that makes you feel, also. Um, and whether students can succeed when they're in that situation where their brains are just flooded and overloaded.
Right. So we need to really notice those places in the curriculum where it's just cognitive overload. It's more than what the kids can handle at that moment.
Yes. And it's usually a place where we almost always err on too much in
Yes.
teaching.
Yes.
We hardly ever err on too little because we're so anxious to get it all out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely fallen into that trap. You have that extra 5 minutes at the end of class. So, let's do another review or let's add another question on.
Mhm.
Like, oh, they finished these 20. Let's give them another five because we've got extra minutes. Like you want to just teach bell to bell. You want to just maximize every moment. And it can really be counterproductive because there's only so much that our brains can hold. And you might be better off giving the kids a little bit of space to process what they've already done, to downregulate their nervous systems, to sort of have a chance to refocus before moving on to the next thing.
Yes. And the other thing about cognitive overload, which people may not be aware of, is I know I used to have a math curriculum with a lot of games, and I'm certainly not against games. Um, but if you're trying to teach math facts through things like games, some of the cognitive overload can actually come from kids trying to remember the rules of the game, or
Mm-hmm.
did I win or lose, or um, the cards fell on the floor, or and that's all actually taking up brain space too, especially if it's new information around how the game works or how you record your score. um, so sometimes we have to balance the actual skill that we're trying to teach with, is it fettered by a lot of other things that actually take up the learning space.
Right. And I think that speaks to the need to not be constantly chasing novelty, play the same game multiple times so the
Yeah,
kids aren't thinking about what are the rules to the game? What do I do in this scenario? But I can actually focus on the skill. And same thing with technology. If we're introducing new tech tools all the time, then we're just thinking about the tech tool and we're getting the cognitive overwhelm. We haven't even gotten to the skill yet or the concept that we want kids to
exactly.
practice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And the same with materials. And if we're always throwing in a new idea for a cool lesson, it's great. I'm not against creativity, of course, at all. It's just being aware of that as teachers.
Right.
Yeah.
So the last example of clutter in the curriculum that you give before we start talking about solutions here is the lack of accurate testing and teaching. And you wrote in your article, this will be an exact quote from your article. You wrote, "The road for a lot of curriculum has no stop signs and no U-turns. It's a superhighway at top speed without even much chance to slow down and look at the map to see where you are. If you're feeling out of touch with what your students actually know or feeling that you're failing some of your students, it may be that the crucial elements of regular assessment and reteaching are missing." And I read that and I thought, whoa, this is very relatable for a lot of people. Can you give us an example of when you've experienced this or what you mean by this lack of accurate testing and reteaching?
You know, I've been thinking about this, and I think I lived my teaching life with this for so many years that I can't even think of a specific example. It was just everything. It was just
Constant, yes.
constant. Uh, and it wasn't until probably I taught in public school for 24 years, kindergarten through second grade. It probably wasn't until at least 15 years in that I even recognized it as a problem. That I
Hmm.
even thought, wow, this isn't, something's not right, but I don't know what it is. And it's basically that I don't have a handle on what the kids know,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which uh, when you think about it is so basic. But I also think when I started that assessment was not as big a thing as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
It became more of a key word farther in.
Yes, I agree. And also, I feel like I was trained more in teaching rather than in learning, which is two totally
Mhm.
different things. I was
Mhm.
very focused on what I was doing as a teacher versus what are the kids actually learning? How are they learning? Where are they at? It was about me. It was a teacher-centered classroom a lot of times.
Absolutely. And that's the pivot point that I made
Uh-huh.
at that point was thinking, oh, wait a minute. There's a connection here between knowing what I'm doing
Yeah.
and knowing where the kids are exactly. And
Mhm.
it was really exciting for me actually. It started making teaching exciting again.
Yes. And I also feel like it's empowering because you spoke in the beginning about how, the people writing curriculum are supposed to be the experts. And so I always felt like, well, if my kids can't learn this or if I'm not fast enough and or I can't teach it well enough, then the problem's me. It didn't occur to me for many years, the same way it didn't occur to you, that maybe the problem is actually the curriculum.
Mhm.
Maybe I don't have a good handle on what my kids are learning because I'm just forging ahead with trying to do as much as possible, assuming that the people who wrote the curriculum, know more than me. Surely this has been classroom tested, must have been peer reviewed. It was a
Right,
committee of
right.
people, right? Like I trusted their expertise over my own and didn't realize that I think there has to be a balance. Like, yes, we do need proven curriculum. I don't want to discount that whole process, but I think also knowing that paying attention to the kids right in front of me also contributes so much valuable information and is they are more important than what's in the teacher's manual.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Rather than thinking, wow, every other first grade teacher in the country who has this curriculum is, probably teaching it really well. What am I doing wrong?
Yes.
My kids are behind. What's wrong with my school? What's wrong
Yes.
with me?
Yes, it must be me. It must be the students. It must be their parents. It must be, and
Mhm.
really, we don't really stop to look at, okay, what exactly are we trying to do with kids? So I love that we have identified some possible sources of clutter in the curriculum. We've talked about fast pacing, about lack of specific objectives, too much cognitive overload, and a lack of accurate assessment and reteaching. So let's focus now on some of the fixes. And that process starts by consciously avoiding blaming yourself or your students. Let's talk a little bit more about what that looks like.
Yeah. Well, really, it starts with the point that we just touched on, which has
Hmm.
to do with assessing, really, where are they starting from? And really being curious about that. That's so essential. Um, and also starting with, well, okay, here's where they're starting from. Where do we want them to be at the end of the year? What are the standards? What are we trying to meet? And then kind of working your way back, starting with that. Well, what would, how do we break that down into months or weeks or, um, but always with the idea that we have to start from where they are.
Mm-hmm. Not with what the curriculum says to start with. Day one lesson, here's what you do. You're starting with where the kids are.
Exactly. They might not be ready for day one, lesson one.
Yes. So what
Yeah.
does a teacher do in that kind of situation? Let's say that you recognize, okay, we're starting a new unit. The kids don't have the background information for this, or they don't have the skills, or not quite there yet. But the teacher's guide is saying, let's forge ahead with this, or the pacing guide, or the district, someone is putting pressure on me to go ahead with this. What should a teacher do in that situation?
Hmm. Well, I think, um, first of all, it helps to be supported by your fellow um, teachers
Hmm.
because it takes some bravery to
It
say,
does.
no, we're going to slow down. Because sometimes you have to slow down to speed up.
Hmm.
You have to slow down and get the basics in place before you can actually, then it pays off. But in that period of time, when you're in the slow down mode or the no, we're not going ahead until they get this mode, it can take a little courage depending on your school, the atmosphere and the climate of your school. And I was always very privileged to work in a school where my principal, I had the same principal for 24 years.
Wow.
It was awesome. And, when I tell people that, they're like, and it was a good principal. Um, so, yeah, just you either have to feel really strong in yourself about what you're doing, and that often doesn't happen when you're a new teacher. I know I didn't feel that way at all. Um, or just be able to be with people who say, yeah, that's right. That's right for kids. And they will get there.
Hmm.
They will. The other thing is, once you've worked that way for a while, you can see the benefits of it. And you have a little more faith that, okay, we should be here, but we're not. But we're doing this, and I hope it's the right thing to do. Um, and I've seen that writing is my specialty, and that's the curriculum that I've created is how to teach writing. And I've seen that over and over again with writing. Once they get the handwriting piece and the spacing, and it's like, whew, they take off.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It is easier to see, I feel like at the early childhood level, you get very used to teaching in that way, spending a lot of time on foundational things. And then you see that it's like a light bulb moment, it just clicks for them one day. And
Mhm.
you're right that the more you do it that way, the more you have faith in the process and you're able to trust yourself and trust your students that doing that is going to pay off. Another thing that you mentioned is creating a roadmap for the year. So when you're thinking about where your students are at and where you're trying to get them to go, how do you create a roadmap in a way that helps you declutter curriculum?
Mhm. Well, I think it's really important to do break it down into months and then break it down into weeks. And of course, it's almost like making our own pacing guide, right?
Hmm.
Um, and of course, no pacing guide ever works out exactly the way we think it's going to, whether we made it or somebody else made it. Um, but I think that, well, for me anyway, that's worked really well. Just here's what we're going to be focusing on first because these skills need to come first, or they're more basic. And then having a year plan, like a big year planner. So I would have a big year planner, and then a month planner, and then of course the famous teacher weekly plan book.
Hmm. Yeah, that can really be helpful. How does that work? And going at the pace your students need, how does that work when teachers are expected to cover a predefined amount of content in the year, and students are expected to get to a certain level of mastery in a set amount of skills? So, like we're creating our own pacing guide, but we're still accountable for the
Hmm.
one the district provides. What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that it has to be one or the other. I think that we can, going back to just trusting the process and trusting the learning process and how it works. And if we're doing things the way that I'm outlining in the article, for example, teaching a lesson where you start with review and then you introduce a small amount of material and then you have a lot of practice. If you're doing that, I think that your students are going to be at least close to where they need to be at the end of the year. Um, because that's just good teaching practice.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing that, um, I think you can trust. And if they're not, chances are nobody's kids are there. I mean, if
Right.
yours aren't, chances are the teacher next door to you and the teacher, in another building, and they're all going through that. Because if the goals are that high, and you're doing all the best teaching practices that and your kids aren't there, you're not the only one.
Yes.
Then the standards are something's wrong.
That's right. And that goes back to the solidarity piece you were talking about earlier about, standing with other teachers, being open about this and transparent, being brave enough to say, my kids aren't getting this on the schedule that they're quote unquote
Mhm.
supposed to. Are you seeing the same thing? I know every time I've done that, almost all of my coworkers have said yes. And then
Mhm.
every now and then there'll be one or two who'll be like, no, I feel like they're mostly getting it. And then I'll say, so what are you doing? Tell me
Exactly.
about it. Tell me, like, how did you do that? What happened when you got to this lesson? My kids were just sitting there, like, looking at me like deer in headlights, totally didn't get it. What did you do? And then they'll
Mhm.
say, oh, well, let me think back. Like, I think we did this hands on thing. I think I got out the manipulatives and we really started working with such and such. I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about that. So those conversations with other teachers, I feel like are really helpful. Have you seen the same thing?
Absolutely. And this is where teachers are the experts, not
Mm,
the curriculum. The people who write the stuff, yeah, they're experts in some things, but we are the experts in carrying it out day to day with our kids in our schools, with our materials. And that's the beauty of a good PLC.
mhm.
If you're in a professional learning community and that's working well, that's which I also had the privilege of being part of for many years. And we learned so much from each other.
Mhm. Yeah, it's
Yes.
important to find those teachers. If you don't have someone like that at your school, maybe you're the only teacher of your grade level, your subject at your school. See if you can find other folks. I recommend locally because they're going to have the exact same challenges as you in terms of district regulations. But even just connecting with other teachers online and say, hey, we're teaching about main idea and the kids are really struggling with this. What have you done that helped your kids push past that? Can if nothing else, it will make you feel less alone and stop making you feel like there's something wrong with me and my students. I'm not working hard enough. I'm not doing good enough. My kids, then you can kind of slip down that whole slippery trail of like, the kids don't care. They're not motivated. They can't do this. All of these really, disempowering thoughts that are not true and really sell our students short and cause us to set low expectations. When you hear other teachers saying, yes, we have been through the same thing, you realize there's a gap between who students are as actual human children and what they're being expected to do by the standards in the curriculum, and learning how to sort of bridge that gap, as you said, really respecting the expertise of fellow teachers who are the experts in the implementation. And I love that distinction that you made. It takes a special skill set to be able to write curriculum, but it's a very different skill set to implement it well. And to have faith in your own ability to do that, I think is very powerful.
Hmm. Yeah.
What would you say to a teacher who's listening to this, who's thinking, okay, I can see the clutter in my curriculum. I can see the bloat in the curriculum, the fast pacing, the cognitive overload. But how do I start decluttering? The school year is already underway. I really don't have the time to do a deep dive into my curriculum right now. I'm kind of just like trying to stay afloat. What should I do first? What can I do that would be a meaningful step to declutter my curriculum?
I think it's a great time to pause mid-year and say, where are we? Let's take stock. Let's look at where we still need to go, and where are my students? And for some people, of course, it's report card time too, so you're already doing that. The other thing you can do, even if you don't have it thoroughly, together this year, is just to start looking at individual lessons and start looking at the objectives. And in my print article, there's some references at the end for books and articles if you want to go deeper, and then reading a little bit about, and I'm sure a lot of listeners already know this, what a really good learning objective is, and just comparing that and saying, is this clear? And how would I phrase that? Or if, what would, put it in your own words kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Does it work in my own words? So it's not an easy thing to do. I don't ever want to make it sound like this is a super easy thing to do. And I guess the other thing to emphasize would be find people to do it with.
Yes. You should not have to do this on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And knowing that, it is a pretty in-depth process, but I think even just being aware of it, even just going into your lesson plans for tomorrow and thinking about the things we've talked about here, like, wait, where am I giving in to fast pacing? Where am I, overloading my kids because I felt like I should be adding this extra thing in, even though in the back of my mind, I know it's going to make us feel rushed. I know they're not going to be able to do that much in one day. I'm pushing it. Maybe I can just ease up a little bit in the next thing that I have planned. I think just even seeing things through this lens of just an awareness of the clutter and curriculum can be helpful.
Definitely. Yeah. Start with telling yourself what a great teacher you are already. That's where to start.
That is a great place to start.